Well, if your car makes a really bad clicking sound whenever you turn, particularly sharp turns, going from a stop to getting going, the usual culprit for that is a CV joint. You can do a lot to replace axle seals and repack the grease, but it's easy and inexpensive to just replace the whole CV axle. So let's get started. I'm going to be replacing the passenger side one. They are slightly different, so just make sure you follow all the details. And you are going to want to jack up this side. First thing we're going to want to take out is the hub nut, which is behind here. And so just get a small screwdriver to pry this off. This is your hub nut, and see how it's dented in right there? That's a staked nut, so it can't move. And so we're going to unstake it. So I just kind of hammered my screwdriver in there and then just pry upward. Then when that's out of the way, we're just gonna break that loose first before we start jacking anything up. All right, and this sucker takes a 36mm socket, so I had to buy that just for this job. This thing's torqued to 200 pounds, so just broke my ratchet. I'm gonna try that again with an impact wrench. Almost, because I just broke my. Come on. Is that your parking brake? Nope, I broke 2 ratchets now. It goes without saying that with a job like this, you're going to need a breaker bar. This is the usual breaker bar. Yeah, it's a couple feet long. Usually it's plenty for anything. Then I have this handle that's been a great breaker bar. I just can't fit it over the end. So then I went and found this bike rack that I can slide that in. I think this might do. Once I realized how much torque it was going to take to get that axle hub nut off, I called up a diesel mechanic friend of mine, and he came up with an impact wrench with 12 to 1400 foot-pounds of torque, and that got the axle nut right off. And then he just helped me finish the job that day, and I didn't get the rest of the video. So armed with that knowledge and how tight that axle hub nut was going to be, that following weekend I got started over on the driver's side, and that's where we are now. Alright, so very first thing when doing the CV axles is getting to the axle nut right here behind this Honda logo. Just need a small screwdriver. And this is what's called a staked axle nut. See how it's bent in right there? You just need to get a screwdriver in there and bend that out. So I'm using kind of a more heavy-duty chisel. Alright, next the goal is to just break loose that axle nut and then break loose your lug nuts. Last time I tried this though, that was the tightest nut I've ever tried in my life, and only a heavy-duty impact wrench would do it. I'm hoping this one's not as tight, so I'm going to try it with my breaker bar. We'll see. Alright, so going at it with this impact wrench. This is a 600, I think, foot-pound, half-inch impact wrench. This thing just wasn't doing it. Like, we were hitting it and hitting it. Ran WD-40 in there and that wasn't getting it. I wish I'd gotten this on video, but I finally pulled the wheel off. And my friend came over here and he's got a breaker bar that's actually worthy of the task. Here's his 36mm socket with a 3/4 inch breaker bar, and then we put that pipe on it to get the right leverage, and then he had me hold down on the brake, and then when he pulled on it, that finally broke it loose. Alright, so it just depends on what order you're doing this in, but if you break the nut loose with the wheel on, then obviously take the wheel off, and then you can go ahead and finish pulling the nut off. Or in this case, I took the wheel off, so now we're ready for the next step. Right here's the brake line, and this is the retainer, and so if we just pull this bolt out, then we can get the retainer off and just move the brake line out of the way. Okay, and that is a 12mm bolt there. Also, to get stuff out of your way and make sure you don't damage it, here's the ABS sensor wire. And if we just pull that off right here, we can get that out of our... And so that was a 10mm socket, and then I had to use an extension. Just put that. And next, we're gonna wanna take out these strut mounts here. This is a 24mm socket, and you're gonna wanna get a wrench on this side. I don't happen to have one big enough, so I'm just gonna use a crescent. So now with the strut mounts taken out, the only thing that's kind of holding up the rotors and everything is the down here on the ball joint. Okay, so this should give us enough pull to be able to pull the outer part of the axle. You don't want to tug too much on your brake line here. The book says to tap here with an awl or a center punch. Helps a lot. Just, and then once the CV axle comes in, so it's coming out back here. I was thinking of putting a screwdriver through here to hold that from falling so it doesn't yank on the brake line. But since it's still sitting on the ball joint there, it's not going to fall any further. All right, so the goal now is to just get back here behind the shaft, dry. From everything I've seen, these things can be boogers. This one is easier to get to than the passenger side. So if you're doing the passenger side, I feel bad for you because there's a guard over the boot, and to get that guard off, you have to remove a section of exhaust pipe. And to move that exhaust pipe, you've got to move brace that goes across the bottom. Alright, so I saw this done on YouTube, so I'm going to give it a try. Get this stuck CV axle out of there. Just tied this nylon strap on there. Tied the other end to my hammer. Kind of use it like a slide hammer. Just swing the hammer out here. Finally banging on it with that hammer tied to a rope, and I came in here with a crowbar. Gave it a little pry this way, and it finally comes mostly loose. But my ATF is leaking out of there, which means I'm probably going to need to replace that axle seal. Last little bit there. For some reason I decided not to replace that axle seal right there. I guess I just thought it was fine. Do the axle seal. Go ahead. It's not that expensive. They're as cheap as $5, maybe up to $15. Either way, it's totally worth it to just do that axle seal, because when I put everything back together after this, I was leaking ATF everywhere. The axle seal may have been fine, but then it got damaged, pulling stuff in and out. So word to the wise, take it from me, do the axle seal now. And removing this seal is actually pretty easy. Like they make this special tool so you can stick it in there and rock it out. You might need that. I just used the back of my claw hammer and it popped out pretty easy. Compare the new seal just to make sure it's right. And then putting it in, we're just gonna take a deep well socket. Probably it's fine to use the 36mm that you use to pull your axle nut with. We're gonna use that as a drift to hammer it in. So here's the old axle seal, and you can tell it's damaged. Like some of this flange here is torn. If you'll notice inside the seal here, there's a little spring, keeps it tight. That part goes in against the engine, and then this flat side outward, it's gonna meet with the axle. So first, just take some of that ATF there and just rub it on the outside of the seal. Okay, now this is gonna pop in there. We want it to seat straight in. Get it to go straight in. Use that 36mm socket we used for the axle nut. So you want to make sure that's seated all the way in, and it does sit below the edge of this. It's not flush with it, it's down in. Rub some ATF around there. Now we're ready to slide that axle back in. Right now it's time for reinsertion of the new CV axle. Basically we're just gonna put those splines and they're gonna slide in here. One of the things that can give you trouble with this is there's this retaining clip right here, and I've seen people do different things. One tip is to make sure it's just hanging so that the gap is facing upwards so it hangs. Another trick is to put some grease on it to keep it in position, and that should help it from getting jammed. If it's like this or something, it can get jammed as you put it in. So let's try to slide this in. Not to just slide in there. Just line up the splines, and you should feel it kind of pop in there. Just FYI, what we're looking for is the seat far enough down. Should kind of click into place, but this face right here, right up against here. So we're looking for this to meet up against there. A lot of people just will tap on the end right here. Even turn this nut around to give you a face to tap on. However, if you're doing it like I am, where we still have the brake caliper on and the steering knuckle and everything, you can't get a straight shot at it. The problem with hammering on it from this end, not only is it not a straight shot, but all of your hammering gets kind of absorbed with the boot as it bounces back and forth. That wasn't really working, so I just grabbed the shaft with both hands and kind of kept ramming at it. And then finally I just felt it click in, like this. And then it clicked in. So our next step is to get these outer splines into the hub here. We got to go under the strut there. This needs to come down a bit. And as you can see, these carriage bolts need to line up here and here. At the same time, you're trying to get your splines to line up in the center of the hub, like a puzzle. So I'm just gonna put a screwdriver in there just to keep my rotor from spinning so I can grab it and pull at the same time. The problem I'm having right now is the strut is running into the boot. I need to push down on the whole steering knuckle. And then I'm gonna try to slide in one of these strut mounts to line it all up. So the control arm down there, down to the ball joint, right up under the hub, and you're gonna wanna push it down to line up these holes. I'm not gonna try to act like this is super easy. So the tricky thing I'm dealing with right here is trying to slide the CV axle in to this hole at the same time as lining up these strut mount bolts. I'm trying not to booger up the boot here, so I'm pushing down on the suspension, try to get that away, but then trying to pull all this in at the same time. Got the top one in now, the bottom one's not lining up. We're gonna work on it though. Aha, I figured something out. So if you push on the brake caliper inward, pull on the steering arm, that's the leverage you need to get that hole lined up. Those nuts back on. All right, for these strut mount bolts, it's a 24 millimeter, remember? I'm gonna put the socket over here and just hold it with a wrench there. Get your torque wrench set to 116 foot-pounds. Okay, and before we go any further, don't forget your ABS line. Just that little 10 millimeter screw there holds it down. The extension on your wrench to get down in there. Not super concerned with torque with these kind of things, just to get it snug. Get your brake line. That's what's more important, it's your brake line. Now, I just threaded the axle nut on here. I don't remember if I said this already or not, but this is what broke the axle nut loose. It's just a good 3/4 inch breaker bar. Right now we're just gonna tighten it, just real good and tight, but we're not gonna torque it until we get the tire back up. Let's get our tire on. Okay, so I just tightened these kind of hand tight before I took everything off the jack. And now we're gonna torque all this, and that should be our last step. Lug nuts on the wheel is only 80 foot-pounds. Torque spec for this axle nut is 210 foot-pound. It's a hefty one, and after we get that, then we're gonna stake it down right there. Put a punch on there like this, and just stake that down in there. All right, and with that staked, I'm gonna call this job done. Slap my Honda back on there. Actually, one thing you're gonna have to remember is we did leak out some ATF doing this job, so I'm gonna drive it around for the test drive right now, but I'm also warming it up so that I can check the dipstick for the ATF that we lost.
Save money, learn stuff, do it yourself.
There goes that screwdriver. This special tool probably works fine to use the 30